Hello, hello, hello. Oh my goodness. Hey besties. What's up? While everybody's here, please don't forget to like the video, subscribe to my channel. Happy Transit Chat Sunday. Pew, 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 pew. I hope everybody's doing all right. Welcome in, welcome in. I see everyone is here. Thank you for your patience. I had to finish setting up my rituals in the back. Um, Good afternoon to Maya. Good afternoon to Carrington. No, I can't believe it's October. We're a week into October already almost. Crazy. Hey Desiree, Dr. Deb, good afternoon. Sherry, oh my gosh, long time no see. I hope everything has calmed down. I know you've been going through a lot. At least I remember before you went away, you were going through a lot. So I hope everything has started to resolve, or at least just you get a long break from all of that. So good to have you back. Hello to Sloan. Happy Sunday. And yes. And hello to Lo. Yay. All right. Cool. So it's a week. We have 3 transits this week and some moon transits as well that I think will be pretty significant. So we are looking at the full moon in Pisces on October. Oops, I already forgot my dates. We have the full moon in Pisces, which is not an eclipse, and that is on October 7th, Tuesday, October 7th. This is the culmination, I would say, or the just the opposition point from that really big Pisces stellium eclipse when Saturn entered Pisces back at the end of March. I believe that was like March 29th. If you remember that eclipse, this full moon is the aha moment or the culmination or the, oh, that's what that was about type of moment that we will be exploring today. And on that same day, Tuesday, October 7th, the moon will also enter Aries, which means the moon will oppose Mercury for the first time because Mercury just moved into Libra last week. So I think because of the astrology of the full moon, that will be a day. Then the next big transit will have Venus entering Virgo on Thursday, October 9th. And on that same day, later that night, the moon will enter Taurus, which is a Venus ruled moon. So that feels like it'll be interesting. Maybe not immediately, but probably by Friday. I think more themes directly related to Venus and Virgo, but also, I guess we don't have anything else in fixed signs besides the nodes. That'll probably be an interesting moment as well. And then we get to Saturday, October the 11th, where Venus in Virgo, freshly in Virgo, will oppose Saturn in Pisces, who is due to station direct in the next month or two, I believe. Maybe in the next 2 months. I could be wrong, but Saturn is slowing down a lot. So we'll have that Venus Saturn opposition. And then at the end of Saturday, we will have the moon entering Gemini at 21 at 9 p.m. Central Time. So I do think Saturday and Sunday will also be extremely annoying days. Just a heads up. Probably even through Monday. Because the moon doesn't enter Cancer until 1 a.m. on Tuesday. So I think this weekend, I'm going to just give you all a heads up. I think this weekend is going to be very annoying, and I will explain why. But yeah, each day that a planet, that an aspect, that something changes, the moon will also be responding directly to it. So that just might be a little itchy. I don't usually talk about moon cycles because it feels like a lot of layers whenever aspects themselves are already complicated enough. But I was looking at it and thought I just might as well give you all a heads up. So that being said, I just want to give a brief overview of what this astro actually means for you. And then I want to pull cards for the full moon. I think there's a lot of nuances to the transits and the seasons that we're moving into right now that just feel like a lot to cover. But the main 2 themes that everybody should be focused on are, 1, mutable, planets that are immutable signs. That's going to be Pisces, Gemini, and Virgo. Mutable stuff, as you know, is about discernment, certainty, trust, and truth. So especially when it comes to planets moving through Virgo, there's a question of, am I seeing what I'm seeing? And with Gemini and Pisces alike, Jupiter is only going to be in Gemini for about 2 more weeks, maybe a little bit less than 2 more weeks. So while Jupiter is still in Gemini, the question of there being an overload of information that doesn't necessarily provide context for what's actually going on. It's just like a bunch of disparate pieces of information all over the place that seem unrelated if you take them at face value. But if you were to weave them all together and read between the lines of that information, you would get the larger, broader context, or at least something that would explain what's going on in a more contextual way than just a bunch of individual events that keep on happening. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. The other side of the coin is these cardinal transits, where we've got planets moving through Libra, and then Jupiter will enter Cancer soon, which we talked about a little bit last week. So that's going to bring us back into our control and regulation bag. Control, regulation, wrestling for power, and dealing with themes around neglect. So that's basically what's going on. Now, in terms of this full moon, and then the moon eventually entering Aries later that day to oppose Mercury. The layout of the sky while these planets are in Virgo, while Jupiter's still in Gemini, is that Mercury still has a lot of power. So Mercury in Libra right now is doing a lot. And I think we've talked before about one thing Mercury in Libra likes to do is use language to manufacture consent. It also likes to talk about things in a way that disarms people or that conceals the truth of what it is they're actually trying to say. And it's also a way of using power as a way to using language as a way to leverage power, whether that's for us or against us, a way to manipulate the masses into believing certain things or behaving a certain way or thinking a certain way. That way, usually what happens, I feel like, during Libra transits is some kind of legislation gets passed, where if you take the legislation at face value, you would think, oh, okay, maybe that doesn't seem so bad, or you just sort of dismiss the power of that legislation. But then when you read between the lines of the fine print of said legislation, you realize, like, oh, actually, this is much worse than what it looks like. So I know a lot of that's already been happening, but I want to kind of explain that with the astro. So yes, Mercury in Libra has a lot of power right now. And then the way I would describe this full moon in Pisces moment is that, like I said, all year since March, we've just been bombarded with information. We've been bombarded with conversations. It's like something big is happening every single day. I believe a lot of people have referred to it as something that author Naomi Klein wrote about in her book, The Shock Doctrine. It is just this process of constantly basically traumatizing, or at the very least stressing people out with information and making it seem like a bunch of things are happening, so that you basically get this this learned helplessness feeling that there's just so many things happening at once that by the time you figured out one crisis, here comes another crisis. And it keeps you in this dysregulated state constantly, so that you feel like you can't fight back fast enough, and eventually you just give up and you roll over and just let things happen because it feels like you don't have any power. And I think part of the reason why being bombarded with information is working so well in terms of Jupiter in Gemini is that, like I said, if you take, and I'm speaking politically right now, I'll try to bring this down to the individual level when we pull cards, but politically speaking, it makes you lose the larger, broader context and the larger, broader themes that we should all be collectively fighting against. And it makes it to where you're now fighting these small, seemingly unrelated battles constantly, instead of seeing how all of these battles connect to one another and speak to this larger thing. So the larger thing, of course, being capitalism. It's always capitalism. And you could even add in imperialism, because I am speaking in a globalist way when I say this, because capitalism is kind of the global structure that everyone is having to navigate to some extent, whether they have a different policy within their countries. On a national stage, capitalism is the beast. And because the United States itself has as much power as it does, being international bullies, the ways that people in the US and these kind of larger elites, these kind of vague elites people, that are really calling the shots. They're the ones who have all of the power, and they're strategically hidden from public consciousness so that we don't blame them, and so that instead it's easy for us to get swept up in these battles that we start to have with each other and on the local level. So there's a way of separating us from the larger global stage, and then there's a way of separating us within this country so that we continue to vote for things without realizing we're voting for things. And so it's like a democracy that's not really a democracy. And it keeps all of us kind of at each other's throats with this perceived political divide of Republican and Democrat, right? Or conservative and liberal, when at the end of the day, everybody's a neoliberal or neoconservative at this point, and they're all working in service of capitalism. Whereas us, the working class, the people on the ground, we're all maybe striving towards something more socialist, more communist, where we, instead of making a whole bunch of money for a few people at the top, we reclaim um our power through our labor, through um, what we contribute, and the fact that we make society run, right? So that's the main divide. The class divide, I think, is one of the biggest ones that we should focus on. And then within the class divide, there are plenty of other things that we now have to decolonize, such as gender, race, and sexuality, everything else, so on and so forth. So I think what was going on at the time of the new moon and Saturn moving into Pisces was this sort of less speaking directly to what's going on and more diverting our attention to other things. And then what did I say this morning? I was talking to Nube about what I wanted to cover today. And basically I'll use Gaza as Gaza and Palestine as an example, and see if I can break this down. First off, a podcast everybody should listen to. I'm going to put this in the chat. If you are interested in global politics and what's going on with Israel and Gaza and the flotillas and all that kind of stuff, I recommend. It's a Colonial Outcast episode, and it is Colonial Outcast podcast. I thought this is probably the best way or the easiest to understand for me. Flotilla update, secret Gaza development plan. Because one of the guys that hosts this podcast is on that flotilla. So firsthand, direct influence. And then there's a couple of other people featured on the episode who also speak to things. And so let me read what I wrote in the text first so that I can gather my thoughts without repeating myself. Okay, so if we know that Pisces as a sign, as an archetype, is that process of feeling like you're not getting the full story and trying to read into things in order to create meaning or to make sense of what you're witnessing, that's what Pisces does. It fills in the gaps. It tries to make meaning and find information where there seemingly is none. And it's trying to connect the dots as a way, the dots of maybe things that seem unrelated but are actually related, and trying to find some kind of cohesive narrative through reading into the feelings that you're having about an experience that you're having. So you can call that intuition, you can call it pattern recognition, whatever makes sense to you. That's what Pisces does. It says, hey, something feels off, and because it feels off, I'm going to read into this situation and try to make sense of it. And I may not have all the information, but I got to work with what I got. Cool. So whenever we talk about adding in this cardinal stuff, adding in Jupiter in Cancer soon, and then Mercury in Libra, I was saying that the timing of this full moon is really tricky. It's a Jupiter ruled full moon, meaning that we would ideally receive some kind of context that ties together all these seemingly unrelated bits of information that we've been receiving throughout the year, and especially since March. However, the way Jupiter and Mercury are set up right now, um, that being Jupiter and Gemini, Mercury and Libra, and them having that reinforcing trine with one another, it seems that there's a desire to control the narrative by concealing the truth as a way to manipulate or manage people's emotions. So when I talk about the ways that Libra disarms, and Taurus also disarms in its own way. Hey, Jem. Taurus disowns and disarms in its own way. What I mean is speaking to people in a way that gets past their defenses or anything that would trigger a sense of alarm in their bodies, and finding a way to speak that kind of evades that. It's very strategic, and it keeps people from feeling skeptical. It keeps people from feeling like they need to read into something, ideally. Propaganda does this really well. Dog whistles, like we talked about, kind of does this too, except in a reverse way, where if you get people feeling reactive and triggered enough to certain words, you can talk about those and basically say, "Hey, look over here," and people will look in this direction, all while stuff is going on in the back. So it's a lot of creating a diversion and creating a distraction as a way to either disarm you from paying attention to what's actually going on and to looking into it and feeling like something is sketchy, or it's straight up weaponizing your nervous system and making you pay more attention to trans people and to immigrants and to the Epstein files and whatever else. And that's not to say that the Epstein files aren't relevant. I'm getting ahead of myself, but it is to say there's a lot of red herrings being thrown out there to divert your attention and conceal the truth of what's actually going on, especially by people with a lot of power. Also, want to say hi to April, Jim, and Madison. I saw y'all just come in. Hello. So there's that. So then I went on to say, when I talk about concealing the truth, I mean by framing or talking about things in a way that softens or distorts the more alarming aspects of a situation. And yet it still doesn't totally make sense with how we feel intuitively. So how we're emotionally reacting to a situation doesn't match with the information we're being given about said situation. We're more inclined to take the information we're being given at face value and fill in the gaps with our own meanings. And in doing so, we dismiss our true feelings rather than ask the necessary questions. So I definitely feel like that's something that happens on a more interpersonal level. But for the sake of the conversation, yeah, definitely politically. If you're tired of trying to make sense of everything going on, at some point you might just say, okay, what the hell, sure. And dismiss your own urgency of the situation, mostly just because you're tired of feeling that urgency. So for a lot of people, that's just look like tuning out entirely and not paying attention anymore. So then when I talked about concealing the truth of what's actually going on, I went on to say that on a broader scale, capitalism and imperialism are the root cause of so many of our issues, with an added and growing layer of fascism or authoritarianism from Project 2025. Except it's not just Trump, because he's really just the scapegoat of all of it. And it's not just Epstein or even Netanyahu or even the Heritage Foundation. Like, yes, all of these people are involved, but the fact that they are being named and kind of pushed to the front automatically signals to me that they are scapegoats for a larger thing going on in the background. The real driving forces are hidden in the shadows by design, but it's becoming increasingly obvious to many of us on both the right and the left that there's a larger plan in place, and we get closer to figuring out what those plans are by reading between the lines of the legislation that's officially been passed and not getting caught up in the sensationalized conversations coming out from the mainstream media. So, yeah, it's just hard to see through these constant red herrings, basically, especially for people on the right who need somebody to blame more directly. So the reason I'm mentioning this podcast is because after I had this conversation right after I woke up when my third eye was wide open, I listened to this podcast episode, which I guess was from a couple of days ago, and it basically validated everything that I said and even named more people who are probably behind the scenes of this, of all that's going on, at least with Palestine. And then though there's I guess a larger way that all that circulates back to stuff at home. I'll try not to get bogged down by too many of the details because honestly, they should just explain it better than I do. But part of what's really happening with Israel and with Palestine and like everything else that the US has done in the Middle East is that Israel as a fake nation state, right, is it's this kind of militia that does capitalism's bidding for it. One of the issues that people have when trying to talk about this is that there's also a very similar conspiracy, anti-Semitic conspiracy that says, there's a cabal of Jewish elites that are running the world. This is not that. This is straight up just capitalism and mostly like probably American or just white supremacy stuff. It's nothing to do with Jewish people. Everything to do with capitalism and white nationalism and gentrification, colonialization, all that kind of stuff, right? So Israel, because they have that country set up the way that they do with the mythology that it has, it's set up in a way that they can do the things that they're doing and kind of get their ass covered by the United States saying, Israel has a right to defend itself, when in reality, this is a nation occupying another nation. And because of their position in that way, and because of all of the larger plans that we'll say the 1% has for that area, which is mostly like real estate development and gentrification, like we do everywhere else. There are groups that have made a concerted effort to demolish the area, move everybody out, do a genocide basically to reclaim ownership of that land and then turn it into another place where they can make money. And if that seems like it's too obvious, or if that seems like it's too simple for everything that they've been doing, I think that's because we're witnessing what colonialism looks like in real time. A lot of us weren't alive for the slave trades. A lot of us weren't alive for um, Christopher Columbus days. Like a lot of us weren't alive for any of that. So we hear the history of it, the whitewash history of it, and we're like, gee, that sounds like, well, one, the whitewash history of it sounds like it wasn't that bad. And then the decolonized actual history of it is incredibly violent and destructive. So I think we're witnessing that in real time, and it's incredibly disturbing and it's incredibly daunting to see. But the reality is that is what colonialism looks like. So the fact that we're perpetuating it, I think, is hard for people to recognize, because we also in the United States do this all the time. This is basically, I guess, with a little bit less. Well, I don't want to say that because I don't know if that's true. I was going to say less of the war and destruction of it all in this overt way, but in a roundabout way, that's basically the same thing they did with Hawaii, right? They occupied, put military bases there, U.S. military bases there. There was the whole Pearl Harbor bombing thing, and then all that other stuff, like the fake annexation and everything else that happened, like weaseled their way into Hawaii and gentrified it in the same way, kicking people out, poisoning the water, doing this and doing that, so that the people who actually live on that land and people indigenous to that land lose ownership of it and lose their autonomy in the process. So that's basically what's happening in Gaza. And what's been happening for years and years and years, just in general with the occupation of Palestine. And it fits in with all of this other foreign policy stuff around oil and gas. It fits around a lot of stuff that is going on in Africa and will be going on in Africa. As far as like rare earth minerals and cobalt mining and all of these different things, like it's basically colonialism, white supremacy, just exploiting earth and killing people in the process of trying to exploit earth and make money off of it. I really think it's that simple. But the politics of that are, I think, where it gets really confusing, because it's not just Israel and it's not just APAC and it's not just the United States and it's not just Saudi Arabia and Dubai and whoever else. It's like there's a bunch of different nations involved in this process of getting this land and developing this land into something else. Like it's a multinational operation that's going on, which to me I think speaks to the collaborative piece of, like, when we talk about Libra and secret groups of people working together to like achieve a certain goal. So I think because a lot of these are nameless and faceless people, it's hard to actually like pin it on them, which is why we end up blaming people like Netanyahu and Trump and whoever else. But at the end of the day, there are so many people who we don't know who they are, who are really behind these operations. And then at the same time, I think one of the groups was like a Boston, it was like some kind of Boston real estate group that they even try to release a statement and say, yeah, it was only like one or two other people who suggested this idea to us. So we don't condone it. Whole time, like, sure, Jan, you know what I mean? So that that to me goes beyond just the conversations about, I don't know, that to me just speaks to this larger thing of capitalism really being the death of us, and how there's such a concerted effort to make sure people continue to believe in capitalism. That way they end up signing off on things like this, just like they did with, this perceived idea of us going into Afghanistan and Iraq back in the 2020s to, I mean, the 2000s, to establish democracy and all this other stuff, when it's like, I don't know if that's really, I don't know if that's really what's going on. So I think whenever they're talking about, I think this is another thing they mentioned, if I understood correctly. And by the way, y'all, please, Gemini News, take this with a grain of salt, but take all of this with a grain of salt. But I think the other thing that they were talking about was, how some of these countries have also come forward and being like within the United Nations as well, saying that they do recognize Palestine as a independent nation or as a state or something like that. That these gestures are somewhat performative in nature, but they also um, are strategically done so that if you say that Palestine is recognized as its own nation in the context of capitalism and everything else, then then there becomes the question of, okay, who are the people in charge? What does their military or defense force look like? And then how much power do they have? How much of a say do they have over what happens? Basically the self-determination and autonomy of it all. How much power and all that do we give them? And then in doing so, you can kind of do a similar thing like they did with Iraq and Afghanistan, where they send people in to help them establish a democracy and do this and do that, when really it's just more gentrification, more destabilization, more stealing autonomy from the people who live in that region, who have a rightful claim to that land. And I would imagine just creates more issues with Israel as well, because Israel is not just going to like fully agree to a two-state solution. Like, that's fake news. So a lot of this, whenever we talk about Libra stuff and like stripping people of their autonomy, while Mars is also in Libra, I think that's also what that is. Because I even heard them say like they would declare Hamas as an authority of the region, but then if you declare Hamas an authority of the region, then that just gives you more of an excuse to have wars with Hamas, or more reasons to um I don't know, to just, hard for me to explain. Please go listen to the podcast. But basically, yeah, there's a concerted effort to strip Gaza and Palestinians even more from any kind of autonomy and self-determination that they would have, um if there weren't other people just meddling in their business, basically. So that's the best I can explain it. It all makes sense to me astrologically. I should have taken more notes, but I didn't want to get too bogged down in that, because I do want to pull cards and talk about things that are more directly relevant to you on your interpersonal life. But all of that to say, um, with Israel having what's it called? With Israel having shares in this new TikTok purchase, with Peter Thiel and like Palantir and like Elon Musk and all of those tech bros and all the stuff that they are also purchasing in terms of mass media communications and social media stuff, like the mass surveillance state where ICE is now partnering with social media companies to have access to all of our messages, and to continue to deport and disappear not just immigrants, but Black people, and probably at some point queer people, and basically doing Auschwitz 2.0 again, like all this kind of stuff. There's like so many different things going on at once, that at the end of the day, there's one particular goal, and that is white nationalism, capitalism, and enslaving, keeping all of us enslaved, basically. How we fight back against that is looking a lot like, if capitalism is the beast that we're trying to fight, then boycotting and labor strikes. I believe that's what some other countries have done. I think it might have been Italy who shut everything down, or somebody somewhere else in Europe shut everything down to protest everything going on with Israel and Palestine. Like, even something as small as Jimmy Kimmel getting canceled, and so then everybody cancels their Disney Plus subscriptions, and so Disney loses like billions of dollars overnight, and then immediately puts Jimmy Kimmel back on the air. Like, the only thing that we can do that has the largest impact at this point is to, I think, to strike. We've been saying we need a global strike, or at least a national strike, general strike, whatever you want to call it, or massive boycotts. But I think boycotting is hard because you have to get everybody on the same page and boycotting the same thing. But for sure, a general strike, I think, would yield the most benefits, and at the same time would be potentially the most dangerous thing that we could do, because anything that gives our current administration permission to send in the National Guard and any other arms of the army just gets a little scary. So I don't know what the solution is, but this is kind of where we're at. It is scary. It is alarming. If you feel scared and alarmed, like, don't gaslight yourself. Just because it doesn't look bad immediately where you are doesn't mean that it's not bad somewhere else, or that it's not coming, or that it's not related. And for sure, this mass surveillance stuff is looking real sketchy to me. Let me see. Yeah, definitely take a listen to that podcast. It was very informative to me and just kind of made me feel like, oh, that actually makes a lot of sense. My friend Arlo got a warning message when a friend DM'd her that said, "This user is suspected to be part of a terrorist organization called Antifa. Please report any suspicious behavior." Oh, Lord. That's us, y'all. Ew, that just gave me so many goosebumps. Hate it. Yikes. Yikes. So yeah, suppression of information, very Pisces as well. The intentional suppression of information. Probably more of that, I think, is coming with Jupiter and Cancer, ironically. Suppression of information. One, so that we don't try to gain control over the situation, but also so we don't know what's going on. Oh, God, I haven't even thought about bird flu. You know what? You're so right, though. I think bird flu is definitely a Pisces thing for me. Damn. I have not paid attention to bird flu at all. I really dropped the ball on that. See? It works. That fucking propaganda shit, and I say propaganda. Propaganda obviously works, but also at a level 3 alert. Put that mask back on. Put that mask back on, child. Jupiter and Gemini does make it hard to keep up with everything. But it's also just like the fact that they scrubbed all of the information in the tracking that we had. I haven't even seen it come up in my algorithms. Like, just straight up. Bird flu emerged during Pisces Virgo eclipses. It did. It emerged in a 2024 Pisces eclipse, I believe. Is that right? May 2024 or March 2024? Whatever that last yes, all of that to say it was part of I think it was even part of Jupiter in Pisces as well. So that's for sure a link. Damn. Yeah, as long as Saturn is in Pisces, I think it might be something. I can't remember what I used to say. I had a prediction for it somewhere that I can't remember what it was, but I do think that's also a climate change related issue, which is why it felt like Jupiter in Cancer and then eventually Saturn in Aries stuff would bring it back up, because it was directly related to consumerism and obviously animal agriculture and global warming things. So I think I tied that into it being a Cancer cardinal thing, as well as Saturn and Pisces. Saturn and Pisces being us not paying attention to it while it continues to spread in the cardinal sense. Because I think it might have originally come up with Capricorn transits the first time, but I don't remember my timeline. I'll have to go find out about that. But yes, thank you for reminding me of another thing to pay attention to. Cool. Besides that, was there anything else I wanted to point out? I'm already 42 minutes in. Lord. I think besides that, more planets into Virgo just means more evidence. And it also means more misunderstandings. It means more battles of semantics. It means more of this, especially with Venus opposite Saturn this weekend, and the moon in Gemini. Jesus Christ, that's going to be so annoying. But so much of Gemini, Virgo, and Pisces is what you said versus what I heard versus what you meant. Just so much of that. And sometimes you really want to take what they said at face value. Sometimes you take what they said at face value because you don't have the larger context. Sometimes you have the context, but maybe don't have certain details because someone's lying to you. And then sometimes you just straight up already have a narrative in your head that you're really set on. So then when you do hear information, you're choosing to make that information mean what you think it means instead of what it actually means. So mutable madness, right? Fucking annoying, but at least at least at least Jupiter will leave Gemini at some point soon. So cool. Let's pull some cards. Mm. So good. I got the cookie butter oat milk decaf latte from Dutch Bros, if anyone was curious. Only half sweet though. Full sweet, it's a little too much like dessert in a cup. Ooh, I love that, Desiree. My favorite phrase this Virgo season is "don't hear what I didn't say." Child. That is a word. That is a complete sentence. Don't hear what I didn't say. I love that. Did you come up with that? Clock it. Do my quick little shuffles real quick. Saw it on an autism advocacy post. Oh, I love that. That's so good. All right. So this is a card pull for the full moon in Pisces. I know I put Venus and Virgo in the title. I put it in the title because the only transits this week involve Pisces and Virgo, and specifically leading up to the Venus and Virgo, Saturn and Pisces opposition at the end of the week. So that's what I want these cards to go towards. I want these cards to go towards the full moon as well as Venus and Virgo in the opposition to Saturn and Pisces, especially on the interpersonal level, because it's going to be misunderstandings, just misunderstandings or trust issues, right? And I kind of feel like a lot of misunderstandings come from trust issues sometimes too. So yeah. So I want the cards to tell us, and then we'll debrief what these transits will be about this week. To the elevated and healed ancestors and spirits, thank you. We welcome you into the space. We ask for your infinite wisdom and divine guidance and insight into what this full moon in Pisces is really about for us. what we will be working through with Venus and Virgo, how all this ties into the opposition leading up to this weekend. Venus opposite Saturn. How is this showing up for us? What is the thing that we need to overcome during this time? The most challenging aspect of these transits? And what is the way forward? We give thanks. We give thanks. So it is. Ashe. Amen. All right. The way that's not what they said has to be said for every discourse topic. It does. It does. Blue Sky is shitting the bed currently and banning trans and black users left and right. Gross. 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 Liberals just need to go sit down somewhere. We have evolved past the need for liberalism. Sorry. All right. Ooh. Temperance. Of course. Of course. It's Temperance. Hey, girl. Haven't seen you in a long time. Welcome back. All right. Hold on. I really need some chapstick. I'm going to pull the rest of these and I'm going to go put some on. All right. Temperance. Temperance is our card underneath. And then we have Ace of Wands. Oh, this is a beautiful Ace of Wands card. Check this out. Ace of Wands. That is our current circumstances, our current situation. We have Six of Baskets, otherwise known as Six of Cups. I love this card. Six of Cups, Six of Cups. And finally, for our solution, the Magician. Another gorgeous card. Interesting. So we got two majors. This is a big week. Two majors, an ace, and a six. I mean, that is overall positive. So I kind of like to see that. I'm going to let that marinate. I'll put them in the chat while I go grab some chapstick. Temperance, Ace of Wands, Six of Cups, the Magician. Boop. Okay, please hold. Okay. Figured I should cover my head before I start channeling. Don't need any additional problems today. All right. Temperance, Ace of Wands, Six of Baskets, the Magician. Let me talk through these. Temperance. Bloop. Temperance as our context to me speaks to, man, I haven't thought about temperance in a long time. Temperance to me is kind of like moderation, is what first comes to mind. In some ways, it's about not so much harmony, but there's this way of like alchemizing. So taking one resource and turning it into something else or transmuting it into something else that comes up with temperance. Which I think is interesting with the magician also being in this deck. Temperance is about not overdoing it in any particular direction. Hmm. Temperance and the magician together is making me think about all of the different tools of discernment, as in all four signs of the mutable modality: Gemini, Sagittarius, Virgo, and Pisces, and using them all in concert with each other. But yeah, temperance. I think the other thing with temperance is something about like tolerance to me. Tolerance, not as in, um, well, maybe it is. Tolerance as in maybe in this case, tolerating the discomfort of uncertainty feels obvious. Feels very Mars and Libra. I would agree with that. Yeah. There's something about, well, yeah, if we take Mars and Libra into consideration, there's something about strategically using all aspects, all of the tools available to us in this moment, but especially when it comes to finding a way to turn one thing into something else. I don't know. For some reason that's coming up. So I'm going to sit with that while I talk about the rest. Cuz I haven't thought about that card in a while. Ace of Wands, however, is a little bit more obvious. This card, it's a gorgeous card. Aces are always about opportunities, new beginnings, or starting something new, or just having an opportunity to start something new. Ace of Wands, wands are usually, it's related to fire. It's about um actually taking action and making moves and making the most of an opportunity in a tangible physical kind of a way, like using your energy towards something new. And the kind of the creative spark, the inspiration that drives you into action is what the Ace of Wands makes me think about. So if this is our current circumstances, I wonder if we just bring this down to the individual level, like I wonder if there's something to be said for feeling motivated or feeling inspired or feeling a desire to take action. And the question is really how to do so or in what way. What way can I make use of this energy, this desire to get started on something? And it's saying that there is an opportunity to do so, whether it's here now or it comes up this week. Six of Baskets as the kind of the challenge in the middle, the thing to overcome or the thing to solve, the problem to solve, if you will. Six of Baskets is about community. It is about community, it's about relationships, it's about the village, that you live in, your neighborhoods. It's about caring for one another. And I think to see Six of Baskets, Six of Cups underneath Temperance, if we're talking about tolerance, if we're talking about turning something into something else, there's an opportunity to change the way that we navigate our relationships, change the way that we move through community. And maybe if we're really sticking with the discernment piece of it all, the challenge is trusting each other despite the differences that we might have. Because again, if ultimately at the end of the day, there is no real political difference between the right and the left in the United States, this always comes up. And I think it's so annoying, but it's so true. Like, it's making me think about how, like, people who maybe they say they're apolitical or people who aren't radical in either direction People who really believe that we have a functioning democracy and that you just vote and that elections are honest and that like maybe don't know very much about lobbying and don't know much about, I don't know, just kind of like just regular Americans who maybe vote Republican or maybe vote Democrat. I don't know how many of those are left. But I feel like the people we interface with on a daily basis are just like not that serious about, I won't say that they're not that serious, but just the people we interact with on a daily basis, like I feel like the one thing that we all have in common is that we go to work and we participate in consumerism. Like we gotta go to the grocery store. Like we don't always know everyone's political affiliation every minute of every day. It's mostly in our online spaces, I feel like, where we start to see how people actually think. And now that I'm saying that out loud, I actually think that is what creates a lot of mistrust because especially like for my older gens, like millennials and older, we know what it was like to only sort of be online, and we definitely know what it was like before doing politics online was a thing. I feel like people didn't really do politics online before Obama, and definitely didn't really do politics online like that before Trump. So people, oh, my edges are screaming. So people, um, I think have already become more vocal about their politics online than maybe they do in the day to day. But then because they're so vocal about it online, then brings it into more of this public consciousness, dinner table conversation type of thing. And then you get to the pandemic where we all completely had to go online. And I feel like that experience is what led everyone to feel extremely polarized because there were real life events happening and we were responding to it online instead of maybe only talking to people who we knew we agreed with in real life, or just kind of falling into our silos in real life where we didn't really like, it was kind of taboo to talk politics with people just like as casual conversation, and it still is for a lot of people. So I think part of this Pisces thing, at least in this spread that I'm thinking about right now, is that a lot of the mistrust and skepticism right now of us with each other, right? Us just regular people with each other, is the fact that, I mean, because it's still happening to me, like finding out how people think is so cursed. Finding out people's politics and how people think when they're just like speaking out loud in an unregulated space like the internet, like people are retweeting propaganda, people are reposting propaganda. You get to just see immediately the information that everyone's taking in. And I know for me, I don't know about you guys, but I know for me, it's just like, I can't fucking deal with this. Like, I don't want to know how anybody else thinks. Block, mute, unfollow, get out of my face. Like, it's just, and that is in practice, in reality, that is polarizing. There are people who I've considered friends who, once they posted a particular political opinion, I was like, all right, that's enough. Done. And I'm not saying that that's right or wrong, but I'm just mentioning how there was a time where, especially for me, right? Like I always use myself as an example because I grew up primarily around people who did not think like me, did not share my politics, but also like only really talked politics when it was like election season. Other than that, people weren't really talking about politics. Now, they were definitely doing a bunch of other microaggressions all the time, which is still politics. But as far as like actual politics, policy, talking about the president, all that kind of stuff, like people just didn't really do that. So you didn't really know how everyone thought unless you were close to them in some capacity. But now we know what everyone's thinking and everyone's feeling all the time. So I would even just add that beyond politics, we just know what everyone is thinking, what everyone's feeling all the time. And I don't think we're supposed to function that way. Like, even us with ourselves don't know what we're thinking and what we're feeling all the time. So the fact that we get to have access to what everybody else is thinking and feeling all the time is too much. That feels like information overload to me. That feels like being in people's diaries constantly. There's no boundaries. It's very boundaryless. I think that comes up a lot with Pisces stuff too. We should not have this much access to other people's thoughts. And because we have that much access to other people's thoughts, it's created a lot of distrust. So I think that's the gist of what I'm trying to say there. There's something else though in this that I'm not saying, and I want to figure out what that is. Let me see what y'all are saying. That time and ever since broke everyone's minds. It did. So hard to trust folks with the pandemics. My nervous system got to work on that. Yes. I do think the pandemic is a good example. It's always a good example, but I do think like the pandemic and masking is a good example because it did feel like for a lot of us who still mask, it did feel like a betrayal to find out that a lot of people really just kind of gave up and moved on or just decided that this was fine and stopped kind of holding the government's feet to the fire and just kind of stopped wanting accountability in general. Everybody just wanted to go back to normal. And I empathize with wanting to go back to normal, but it is very frustrating whenever you know that normal is dangerous. And I remember at first, like when masking is political still, but when it was very much politicized, and then you started seeing people on the left stop masking, it was like, well, wait, you guys are buying into right-wing propaganda. Stop. And they were just kind of like, no, we're not. Chill out. It's just eugenics. And you're like, yeah, it's eugenics. And they're like, no, 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 no. The government would tell us if it was eugenics. And you're like, but you just said. Anyway, don't want to go down a rabbit hole. But point is, thinking about tolerance and six of baskets in this bread. And then getting to the magician, and the magician, again, being called to use all of your tools in creative and unexpected ways, I think. Or being called to find new ways to navigate using all tools of discernment and not just whichever one is most dominant in the sky, maybe something like that. Me swallowing into the mic, sorry. People who meet me in real life always talk about how nice I am. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to be rude to someone in real life unless they say something bigoted. Excellent example. Yes. I fully believe in matching energy. When I used to try to be kind to everyone, there's no layers anymore. It's too much. One of my friends turned into an abuse apologist overnight, and I'm so confused. Yeah, everybody who goes to Chris Brown's concert. My niece's husband said, I'm just so done with COVID. And I said, well, COVID isn't done with you. Maybe folks will wake up to all the new studies on COVID's effects on kids with Jupiter and Cancer. Oh my gosh. But I know folks hate children. Whole other conversation. Yes, but yes. Exactly on the betrayal around masking, it was a moment where I was like, oh, these people I thought were on the same page with me politically and ethically were not safe anymore. Absolutely. I am in schools a lot in the undertone. I shouldn't laugh at this. Sorry. I'm in schools a lot, and the undertone is for sure fuck them kids. Yes. Okay, so yeah, so y'all are picking up what I'm saying. And if if these themes that I'm mentioning don't directly apply to you, like there is something I'm sure that it applies to where you're realizing that now that you have access to everybody's thoughts and feelings about everything all the time, you're realizing that people maybe you got along with, who you considered a friend, who you spent a lot of time with, who you work with, whatever it is, now you know to some extent the things that they think and believe and agree with, and that feels unsafe. And what I feel like Temperance and the Magician together in this topic are getting at is that it is uncomfortable to know how everybody thinks and feels all the time. And even before you like, there's something in this to me about before you knew how everyone thought and felt, like just because you didn't know that they thought and felt that way doesn't mean that they never felt and thought that way. To some extent, whether it's directly related to these topics or related to something that was more relevant, in the 2010s or 2000s, like they still had thoughts and opinions about all of the really horrific things that were going on during that time. And still somehow we managed to more or less function as a less overtly polarized society on the interpersonal level. You get what I mean? Like we could coexist a little bit better as quote Republicans and Democrats when it came to just doing simple things like watching TV shows and, I don't know, going to dinner. But the more information we've gained about everything, the more everything seems unsafe. And when you get to the point that everything seems unsafe because you know too much, like that's not exactly discernment either. You know what I mean? Um, I'm gonna try to choose my wording carefully, but I'm just gonna hope that you guys understand what I mean. If you, and this is very Pisces to me, if you get to the point where you are so disbelieving and suspicious of everything and everyone around you, you've stopped trusting yourself more than anything. You've stopped trusting yourself to accurately see material reality for what it is because your nervous system is all over the place. And not for no reason. I want to make very clear that it's not for nothing, right? You feel this way for a reason, and you still have to function in reality. And those two things, that's why Saturn and Jupiter don't get along. Because what we want to believe is true about reality versus just having to survive reality are two different things. Sagittarius and Capricorn are right next to each other because you can believe that the rapture is coming on Tuesday all you want. And then if you get to Tuesday and you still have to go to work, well, and so if you get into this place of skepticism where anything that doesn't fit this really narrow belief and perspective that you have about the world, like if you get to the point where you become so insular that you can only be around people who agree with you and you can only talk to people who think exactly the way that you think and you can only exist around people who share your beliefs about the world. One, you're not really living in reality, and two, you can't have community. And again, it's not about being in community with people who are obviously extremist and want you dead. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, again, the middle of the road people who, whenever it comes to something besides politics, they mostly act normal. That's what I'm talking about. It's the people who is just irritating to hear their thoughts and opinions about stuff. And like, yes, depending on where you fall on the ladder of marginalization, some people are going to be more unsafe to you and others. And I say this as a Black trans man who was previously a Black lesbian woman. Like, I get it. And there's still people that we interface with on a daily basis that we have to interface with in order for the world to turn. And so I think part of us starting to get on the same page with each other is deconstructing some of our beliefs and ideas and really getting to the root of how we actually feel. And maybe this is some of the Venus Saturn opposition stuff. So I think I've talked about this before, but whenever you're in conflict with someone, a lot of times the thing you're in conflict with is your own nervous system. Like, your nervous systems are the thing that are really in conflict, and you are fighting your own feelings, whether it's about that person or about the situation or the principle or whatever it is. You're fighting your own feelings and all of the projections that come with them more than you are the person in front of you. So getting into the mindset that it's not about being right or wrong, it's about us versus the problem. I think a lot of what a lot of us could stand to do is like have more conversations about what our problem is. So instead of going straight into the who do we blame for this, just really focusing on the problem itself. If the problem itself is that everything is expensive, then let's just talk about everything is expensive. If the problem itself is that housing is expensive and few and far between, then let's talk about the housing market. If we're talking about being unemployed and how the job market is a mess, then let's talk about the job. Like, there's the face value aspect of the problem that we're dealing with directly and separating that from the politics of it all, because the problem in material reality is the thing that we can relate with, that we can relate to everyone else with, because we're all experiencing the same material reality that shit is way more expensive than it should be. And then I think the magician of it all is like being able, the magician and the temperance of it all is being able to take a conversation about the housing market and gently kind of layering in these other broader ideas of how, the housing crisis is not because immigrants are buying up all the homes, or I don't even know I don't even know what they're talking about as far as like what would cause that problem, but it's like taking the conversation away from the clickbaity conversation of it all and getting more into just these practical ways that um that without saying it, again, without tripping people's dog whistle alarms, without immediately going into this is a capitalism problem. It's just talking about it without it's talking about capitalism without talking about capitalism, talking about fascism without talking about fascism, right? Because like something that I'm noticing happen right now, especially after the whole Charlie Kirk thing and this whole Epstein files thing, is that the right and the left and even some of the extremists and conspiracy theorists are all noticing the same thing, but they all have a different meaning for to explain what it is that they're noticing. And because they have a different, again, thing that they're trying to blame, it's keeping all of us looking in different directions instead of looking in the same direction, which is, like I said, either at the problem itself or at the larger picture. So if we start with the problem itself and have just more intimate, for lack of a better way to talk about it, conversations about how people are experiencing these issues instead of looking for someone to blame, I think we would build a lot more connection and community and relationship through this issue itself. And from there, slowly over time, because it's not going to happen overnight, I think we get into being able to have conversations where we actually call a spade a spade. But in the meantime, we can't just come out and say, yeah, this is capitalism. You kind of have to use other people's language and be like, yeah, the global elites have so many control over our resources that everything has just gotten so expensive. And, me as a worker, like I can work as hard as I want, but for some reason I'm just not getting the payback, right? I feel like you could have that conversation with a right winger and they might be a little bit more receptive to what you're actually trying to say than to just flat out say that, yeah, we should lean more towards a socialist society. Because if people have been programmed to believe that socialism and communism are the devil, then they're not going to want to hear what you have to say about that. But if you can talk to them about those principles and what that economic system actually looks like without naming it, people will hear it and be like, oh, that doesn't sound too bad. It's the same thing that people did during the election, whenever they said the difference between talking about the Affordable Care Act and what it actually is and calling it Obamacare. If you call it Obamacare, people's defenses go up. They don't want to hear nothing else you have to say. I think even calling it Medicare and Medicaid, like for some people, they don't want to hear it anymore. But if you talk about the Affordable Care Act as what it actually was, which is just government subsidized healthcare, then a lot of people were a little bit more on board with that, which is very close to getting to this idea of universal healthcare without saying universal healthcare. So it's like that. There's like a skilled way of having these conversations that can be bonding and that can build trust and make people see that, oh, maybe you don't actually disagree with me as much as I thought you did. We're just in two different algorithms at this point that are making us believe that what we're talking about is right. And I do think, because I am speaking to people who I think consider themselves leftists or at least left leaning, sometimes we also have to get off of our intellectual high horse. We have to stop talking and speaking theory to people who haven't read and who can't read above a sixth grade level and just talk to them straight up. You know, that was some feedback I got from my own family who generally agrees with me on things. And just from a lot of you guys as clients, like if I'm talking to you guys about astrology, or if I'm talking to you guys about whatever, and I'm speaking to you on these lives all the way up here, and I still do this sometimes, but like sometimes the Gemini and the Virgo of it all, the Mercury of it all is you have all of this language that for all intents and purposes is really precise language, but it's also not accessible to a lot of people. So you kind of have to speak to people in a more direct, mundane way that they're going to understand and actually be able to do something with that information instead of just throwing a bunch of really complex topics at people that are going to go over their heads. Like you got to kind of speak to people on their level. So That's kind of what this is giving to me. Maybe that's not all that it is, but I do think as far as this whole discernment piece, like, yeah, if the issue at hand with Mercury and Libra right now, which is going to retrograde, right? We talked about that last week. If the whole issue is, um, or rather, if the skill set that we can utilize is having strategic conversations that can kind of change the way people think about things conceptually, then that would get us to a point where we could act on those things in some kind of way at some point. But the information has to get out somehow, and it has to get to people in a way that evades their defense system. Boom. Boom. Clock it. Okay. Let me see what y'all saying in here. We talk about protecting our most vulnerable clients, but I'm the only one who masks, right? People get defensive when I ask if they have air purifiers in their offices, right? Okay, you got me, and yes, I'm working on extending trust to myself and others, yes. Jupiter is intense. Look, people be scared of Saturn, and I get it, but people are scared of Saturn because they'd rather be in denial. You feel me? Which is a coping strategy of Saturn, denial. But sometimes you got to face the music. Otherwise, the music gonna face you, and then you won't have any autonomy or agency over the situation. You're just gonna be a victim to your circumstances constantly, and you don't want that. You don't want to be powerless when there is something you can do. But the first thing you have to do to be able to act on your circumstances is acknowledge reality. So a lot of that to me is more of a psychological thing. You're more afraid of how you're going to feel once you lean into the truth than the truth itself, unless you're literally going to die. But that's a different thing. And even then, like I said, once you die, you're dead. You ain't got to worry about nothing else no more. It's just the suffering leading up to it that sucks. So Saturn is uncomfortable, but it just is what it is. Jupiter, though, Jupiter is what will make you dance around and around and around without ever confronting what's actually going on. Fabricating and telling yourself all kinds of things that make you feel better, but effectively exacerbate the situation. And it is very intense. It's something that I think is very hard to control. And it's arguably the most human thing about us. Yeah. So that man Jupiter will grab you by the neck and take you with it. And you're like, wait, stop. Belief versus reality. Yes. There are so many people I adored with my whole heart who turned out to be horrible people, and it really does make me question my discernment. Absolutely. And that's also very tricky. I think that's something else that's kind of in this spread is like, yeah, it does. It feels very easy to blame yourself for not seeing everything. Because you're like, well, they're my eyes. What was going on with me that I couldn't see the truth? And sometimes it is, again, sometimes it is you ignoring what's right in front of your face or choosing to believe or impose meaning onto something that is just different from what it actually is. And also, sometimes people are deceiving us. You know, sometimes people are lying and hiding things. But my whole point is to say that the more we can do to question things, to stay curious, both about what we believe and about what other people believe, there's a little bit more room for something different to happen, right? Beliefs being filtered through reality's lens, yes. Or reality being filtered through the lens of what we believe. Noticing telling people COVID is airborne, Will. Sent it early. Oh, okay. Um, Making people tune out by saying, I don't like getting sick, have no sick pay for a reason why I'm asking publics is very relatable to many. Same. I've done the same thing. There have been many times at school where people have asked me why I'm asked. They ask if I'm sick, this and that. And I'll just say, I just flat out say, I just don't want to get sick. And they're like, oh, do you like have a condition? And I was like, no, I just think it's really inconvenient to get a fucking cold. And like, why would I do that when I could just wear a mask? I was like, I don't have to miss any. I was like, I haven't missed any days of work. Like, I haven't gotten sick in years. Like, my allergies are better. Like, I don't know, naming all the practical reasons why it works for you instead of talking about COVID. A lot of times people are just kind of like, oh, and sometimes people will be like, yeah, maybe I should do that. But for the most part, they're at least, they don't tune out of the conversation because you're just like, yeah, I just don't like being sick and this works for me. It's a little inconvenient, but so is being sick. So I just choose this inconvenience over that one. That's what I tell people. And a lot of people are like, oh, word. And they might think it's silly or whatever else, but I'm like, I think it's silly to breathe around crowds of people who cough into the open air like toddlers. But c'est la vie. I'm learning a lot. Thank you. Thank you, Tree Talk. Also, hello. Good to see you again. It's really hard to watch. It's really hard to change folks who are ingrained in beliefs, and that just makes my whole brain twitch. It is hard, and I think that's the point. It's not like I say all of this, right? I'm saying all of this in terms of having conversations with people. I don't necessarily think that trying to convince anyone, like I think the action of trying to convince and the feeling of knowing someone is trying to convince you is such a turnoff, right? Like a lot of people are skeptical of that feeling of this person is trying to convince me of something. I don't like that. So I don't think that's what any of us should be doing. Like it just, there are more skillful ways to influence people to change besides just convincing them with a lot of facts and information until they've gotten to the point of wanting facts and information, right? But usually if you lead with facts and information, people also tune out because they're just kind of like, oh, I don't really care about all this. Like statistics are not real to people. But like we said, having a conversation about like, yeah, I just was missing so many days at work and then I started masking and now I don't miss very many days at all. That would resonate with people better. Stuff like that, right? And it's less convinced. Like you notice how that wasn't convincing. It was just you sharing your experience. People love an anecdote. I don't know if you guys have realized. People love anecdotes. They love anecdotes way more than they love facts and statistics and literature. Don't nobody care about no literature, man. What did I just say? Everybody reads at best a 6th grade level, but a lot at like a 3rd or 4th grade level for real. And that's intentional. Remember, there's concerted efforts to keep people uneducated. So yeah, figuring out a way to speak to people. And that's what Mercury and Libra does, right? It's speaking to the common denominator between us and helping us relate. But you have to do so in a way that's skillful because if you just go right for it, they need a little foreplay. They need a little foreplay, a little warm up. They need to feel a little bit more open to receive before you just jam that information in there. You feel me? Nobody likes that. Nobody likes that. Jupiter says dance, bitch, and shoots at your feet. I'm bad at dancing. I'm crying. Yeah, this is a good point too. We talk about this a lot, but I feel like it's always worth reiterating, especially with this spread. Trying to stay curious about what others believe is tough because again, like just like they have their dog whistles, we have ours. So when you hear people on the right start talking about shit, you like hard working and not wanting to be a victim and blah blah blah. I'm like, pull my ears off. But if you can stay regulated enough, self-regulated, self-soothed enough in those moments to say, oh, why do you believe that? Like, what's been your experience with that? And make it into a personal conversation instead of a larger principled one, then you really get to see people, right? They get to feel heard and understood, and you get to actually understand where they're coming from and empathize, not in the way that you abandon your own convictions, but that you just are like, oh, I see why you think that now. I don't agree, but I see why you think that. Great for conflicts as well, right? Conflicts with people you do agree with. It's like, oh, I see where you were coming from. We're just having a different experience. And I think once we accept that everyone is having their own version of a similar experience, then it starts to be easier again to tie together certain ideas or beliefs or whatever. The most disorienting thing are doctors who see my mask and ask if I want them to mask. Like, well, yes. I hate that so much. Like, why are you asking me? Just put one on. Why is this a conversation? Do you want me to put my mask on? You know how a mask works. A lot of them don't, but you know how a mask works. But doctors are arrogant, so they don't like having their egos checked. Are you sick or just being careful? Yeah. And that's the thing. If the question is, are you sick? Like, that's what I mean when I say there's also a way that Pisces can work in your favor, where if you see someone wearing a mask, rather than asking either of these questions, is the response like, whether it's if someone is being sick or if someone is being careful, the common denominator is both of us masking would be the answer to those questions. Because you're asking if I'm sick because you don't want to get sick. You don't really care if I'm sick. Let's be so fucking for real. You don't care if I'm sick. You don't want to get sick. So if you see me in the mask and your first thought is this person sick? Maybe you just put one on. I don't know. And then if you know the other person is being careful, now, I know a lot of people hate this, not you guys, obviously, but if the other person is being careful, it'd be wonderful if we could just be a little bit more considerate and say, maybe I should be careful around this person. Accommodations. Who fucking would have thought? But no, people won't even wear masks in the NICU anymore. Full circle back to fuck them kids, I guess. 2020 trauma is so deep. I don't know what it's going to take. And it is. It's unfortunate. Hey, Mattia. I had a cashier ask me and my partner why we mask, and then she said, if they don't talk about it, then it's not happening. I have had people say that to me as well. I think something people miss when it comes to trying to change someone is that someone must consent to being changed, and most people aren't. Exactly that. Oh, that's such a good word to use during Libra transits as well. Consent. Consent and coercion, right? I absolutely agree, because it goes back to that whole thing of manipulation. Like, if you have to manipulate somebody into changing, they're only going to revert back to something that feels more authentic to them at some point in the first place. And then you're going to feel betrayed, right? Or you're going to feel like they were lying or just trying to do it to please you or whatever. And it's like, well, they were. You kind of bullied them into it. Something my coach used to tell us all the time was that in order to get people to change, you have to appeal to their values, because it has to be something that feels aligned and with integrity with them. So, it may not be the same reason that you would do something, or it may not be the same motivation that it is for you, but for them, if it motivates them to change, then who fucking cares what the motivation is? They changed, right? I think there's something to be said for that whenever we're talking about tolerance, and like, yeah, maybe people on the right aren't going to agree with you that everybody deserves to have their needs met. But there is a way to appeal to their desire to get their own needs met that also benefits you getting your needs met, right? Stuff like that. Um, but this is also why people don't like people don't like unsolicited advice. People like to feel like they're making their own decisions. And they should. They have the autonomy to do so. It just gets tricky whenever your decisions impact me. Because now me trying to ask you to change your behavior is me trying to advocate for my own safety and self-preservation too. And that's where a lot of conflict between Scorpio and Libra happens. I say I work with medically fragile children and want to protect them, and that usually shuts people up. That's a good one too. I like that. I've definitely said that as well. I'm like, well, we work around people and it just feels like good for me, and it's also good for them. That Jupiter comment hurts. I'm so sorry. Being curious with this natal Jupiter and Gemini of mine is going to be my downfall in life. Sometimes I'm like, I didn't actually want to know all that. Yeah. And I do think, having experienced this transit as an adult, I do think there is such thing as too much information, always. But it's hard as a Gemini when people just give you when people just give you information you didn't ask for all the time. Sometimes you just gotta learn to tune it out, but it's very hard to do. I've lied to randos about the "Are you sick?" question and said yes just to scare them and tell them I wouldn't tell them wearing a mask will prevent them from catching it. I'm a Pisces. Hell yeah. um, Forgot to tell you, but a student at work told me, washing your hands is better protection than that mask, and I'm pretty sure she was a medical assistant. I hate that because I'm a massive advocate of washing your hands even before COVID. People don't wash their hands enough for me personally. And I see it. So you can't tell me that they don't. I watch people all the time do things where they've touched everything and then they touch their face, their mouth, eating, whatever. And I'm like, ah! But like, why do they need to compete? Why we got to pit two bad bitches against each other? Why can't we mask and wash our hands? Maybe it's not Uchi Wally Wally or one mic. Maybe it's both. I don't know. Yeah, it drives me nuts when the whole air it's really I'm not getting into this. Y'all already know what it is. I don't need to go on a COVID rant. This is the gist. The medical establishment is terrifying. The medical for-profit healthcare is a scam. That's that on that. Okay, it's been 90 minutes. I need to stop. I hope those cards made sense. That's not at all what I was expecting from that interpretation, but the more I talked about it, the more it makes sense. So I think whether it's political or not, the moral of the story is having creative conversations with people you're in relationship with as a way to foster connection rather than more polarization, and using all modes of discernment skillfully in order to do so. And it doesn't just benefit others, it benefits you because you need people to. And you deserve to feel some level of safety. You're never going to feel 100% safe with anybody. That's just unrealistic. People are going to hurt you whether they intended to or not. Avoiding hurt and avoiding pain and disappointment is not the point. The point is you trust yourself to have boundaries with other people that say, okay, because of what I know about this person, I can trust them for these things and these things only until I have more information. And you do some level of that with every person you come in contact with. You don't need to talk politics with everybody, actually. Some people you can get along with just fine if you leave politics out of it. It doesn't mean that you're betraying yourself. It means that you are surviving life. You know what I mean? Like, cool. I know that I can only get this deep with this person. But my homie over here, I can get this deep with them. And then if my homie over here disappoints me in some way, there are going to be certain things I stop sharing with that homie. It is a fluctuating boundary that is going to change over time, over and over and over again. And you always are, you specifically, person listening, are always allowed to choose how much you trust somebody and what you trust them with. You are always allowed to choose that. If it feels like a struggle to do that, that is a personal issue. Everybody else cannot make you feel safe. Other people cannot make you feel safe. Other people cannot make you feel safe if you have decided that you don't feel safe. That's not to say they can't do things that would help. But you know how it is. Sometimes people really go out of their way to try to make you trust them, or sometimes you go out of your way to make somebody else trust you and they just have decided that this is where they're at. That's fine. You're allowed to do that and they're allowed to do that, but you have to respond to the information that you're working with in real time and allow for that to change in ways that make sense for you. But that is something that only you can decide. It's very frustrating, especially if you're having your Saturn return right now. I'm so sorry, but this is what that is. This is the lesson. You have to learn to trust yourself, to set those boundaries with people. And they have to be allowed to change as you get more information. I am a therapist. I'm not a therapist. Legally, not a licensed therapist. But I was truly running from this message and came on here and had to sit and listen anyway, so thank you. I fucks with that. I love when spirit confirms. Yeah, the fluctuating part is the hardest part. Me with Jupiter and Scorpio, Jupiter and Venus in Scorpio, I struggle with the fluctuating a lot. I like to just cut off. I'm like, that's it. And not do the work with myself to, you know, see a situation for what it is in my own ways. But I had my a lot of Jupiter in Taurus for me was reckoning with exactly this in its own way, of just feeling like I've really, because Taurus is my 12th house. 12th house deals with solitude and isolation. I really backed myself into a corner of distrust where I didn't let anybody in, including my own family. And that made me want to unalive myself. Because what is the point of being alive if I'm alone all the time? I wasn't into that. So I have had to renegotiate my own boundaries a lot. Sometimes I've renegotiated them a little bit too much, and that becomes dangerous to me. But, you know, you just got to kind of trial and error some things sometimes and deal with the consequences. But most of the time, you'll be okay. And I'm being hyperbolic, but ultimately, if you die, then you're dead. You don't have to worry about it anymore. So thank y'all so much. It's such a dramatic note to end on, but it's its own form of freedom, right? But yeah, you can do this. I can do it. You can do it. We can do it. Take your time doing it. It's scary, but you can do it. And I believe in you. And we will talk about this again for the next 2 years. So don't worry. You have time to think about it and to practice more. Virgo transits are an excellent time to practice things, contrary to popular belief. Great time for trial and error, for research. You feel me? So, I love you guys. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for hanging out with me today. If you haven't already liked the video, please like the video, subscribe to my channel so you can be notified every time I go live. Put that mask back on. Book a reading with me if you want to chat more about your individual chart, and join my Patreon. You can sign up as a free member and get access to half of my posts whenever I post them, as well as a bunch of free posts. And then if you join as a member, you get access to a full post every time that I decide to write one out. I'm going to try to write another one for y'all very soon. So it helps me pay the bills that keep my business running and help me to manage my LLC. So I greatly appreciate it. I love you guys. Hang in there. We will get through this. And I will talk to y'all next week. Bye.